I'd really never run a business before. I'd tried to start them, and I'd, basically had 7 businesses fail before I had my first successful one. But what I've learned over the last 7 years is, as a business owner, you can't just have one stream of revenue. You've got to look at every angle of your business and say, okay, what other ways can I generate revenue? And that strategy helped me in my business. Well, it helped me in my life because we had almost lost our home at one point. We were in financial trouble. And, I say that because it's a cautionary tale. I didn't plan my exit from the company. I just said, done, I'm out, I'll figure this out.
Good morning and welcome to the latest episode of Better Business, Better Life. Today I am joined by Jeff Kikel, who is the founder of Freedom Day Wealth Management. And what I love when I looked at the site is that this little saying that he has. It's about getting you to that first day that you actually have a work optional lifestyle. So that is what Jeff does. He works with people to actually help them to get that state. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, my friend. It's my afternoon back in time. So
yeah, that's right. I'm way ahead of you. Yeah. So it's Friday over there, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's Friday, and it's St. Patty's Day. So.
Oh, of course. Oh, wow. Yes. Happy St. Patty's Day. Great. So, Jeff, you've got a really interesting story because you spent a lot of your life actually working for other people. Sure. And then you suddenly had an aha moment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it was about 8 years ago. I had been in the financial services industry for almost 25 years at that point, working for several major financial services firms. I had left that path and gone to work for a smaller financial service firm, kind of a mid-tier regional firm in Texas. And I was in the process of writing my first book. And my first book was a book that talked about retirement planning for police officers. And I was looking for a way to market the book. And so I thought, maybe I'll do a podcast. That sounds like a good idea. And then I realized, well, maybe I actually need to listen to a podcast because I never had before, and looked for a book on, well, how do you do a podcast? And just happened to come across a book written by a gentleman named John Lee Dumas, who had a exceptionally successful podcast at that time called Entrepreneur on Fire, still is. And I decided, well, let me start listening to what John was talking about and what he was talking about in his book. And I became obsessed because what John was doing was he was interviewing all these entrepreneurs. And I became obsessed with this thing. I mean, I was commuting at least twice a week to Dallas from Austin, which is about a 3-hour car trip. And I would listen to the shows at double speed, driving up and driving back. So I could listen to like 8 shows up, 8 shows back. And what I realized was there were all these people that were no different from than I was. They were no smarter than I was, but they had taken the time to become entrepreneurs. And I was looking for my financial freedom. I was looking for my freedom of time to get away from work. And I decided, well, I'm going to take this step. And it all kind of started coming together. I came up with an idea to open co-working spaces, and I know you and I share that that background. That was my idea. Well, we didn't have anything like that in the town I lived in, so I decided I was going to open a co-working space. I still was going to stay in the financial services firm or industry, so I ended up deciding, okay, well, I'll start my own practice and I'll do that. And it's interesting in life when I keep saying I have God moments in my life, and this was one of those. I had my last ever review with my employer, and it just happened to be my boss and the president of the company. And we had a bit of a strained relationship at that point because they kind of took me down a path that I didn't want to go down. And it was something that what they sold me on when I came to work for them was not what they really wanted. And I remember my boss leaving the room after giving me the worst performance review I'd ever had. And the president was sitting in the room with me, and he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "You I just got to tell you this. You are the worst employee we've ever had. You are, too independent. You just go do things without asking. You don't get approval before you do things. And I looked at him and I said, but that's what you hired me to do. Mm-hmm. And that really led me down to the path of the next 3 months. I basically planned my exit from the company. And in March of 2016, I launched my business. I launched my new practice, and I launched the co-working spaces, or I was in the middle of building co-working space at that time. And I left, and I started my career as an entrepreneur. From that point on, I started my co-working space, wealth management practice, and 4 other businesses over a 7-year period of time. Growing those. And, over the last 2 years, 2 of those businesses grew to the point where I have sold them. Those 2 businesses, I had 7-figure exits from, and, it gave me my financial freedom. But during that time period, I was also exploring other alternatives and other ways of generating income streams. And that was something that I discovered my first couple years of running businesses. I'd really never run a business before. I'd tried to start them, and I'd, basically had 7 businesses fail before I had my first successful one. But what I've learned over the last 7 years is, as a business owner, you can't just have one stream of revenue. You've got to look at every angle of your business and say, okay, what other ways can I generate revenue? And that strategy helped me in my business. Well, it helped me in my life because we had almost lost our home at one point. We were in financial trouble. And, I say that because it's a cautionary tale. I didn't plan my exit from the company. I just said, done, I'm out, I'll figure this out. And I had to, over that 8-year period of time, figure out, okay, how can I extract from my life every possible revenue stream that I can, and today I sit on probably 4 to 8 revenue streams that come in from each of my businesses that I still own.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I guess it is a question that not many people actually ask. They just kind of assume that one business is going to be it. And then I'm not even sure people plan for the exit, to be honest. I think that sometimes we just build a business because we love it and we haven't really thought about what the long term looks like. Yeah. Okay, so fascinating kind of story to get to where you are. Has it all been smooth sailing? Because, we get taught in business school that we have this beautiful, kind of hockey stick growth, and then it sort of eventually tapers off. It doesn't really work like that in real life, does it?
No, not even close. And that was really, I discovered around 18 months in. And I always say for business owners, there's, you have that first year of business, the first 12 months, it's all unicorns and butterflies and all that. We're building something that we love. We love doing what we're doing. We're not making any money, and it's okay because, we get to do that. And then you hit that next 12 months, which is what I call the suck. It is really that period of time where you start to realize, I'm working a lot of hours and I'm not making any money, and I've got to do something. And, I've experienced watching this from the outside with a lot of the people that came into the co-working spaces, and I had worked with, kind of helping and getting them to go. And the point that I would watch them just fizzle out was about 18 months. They just gave up and, I'll go get a job, or I just can't do this. It's not going to work. And I look back and I say, well, why was I successful and these other people weren't? And I'm looked at, in our community as, Jeff's this super successful entrepreneur, and, he does all these things. And I look at it and I said, well, I'm no different from anybody else. The only difference is I just didn't give up. And honestly, there were some points where really at about 18 months, which was our first full summer in the co-working business, because we kind of came in during the selling season, and our first full summer was horrible. We had realized we were running out of money fast. And what I hadn't anticipated was that entrepreneurs really don't work as hard as they should. And we hit summertime and our summertime. And all of a sudden people are like, oh, well, I'm just going to take the summer off and not come in. And, I won't need my office anymore I'll just pick it up in the fall. And it's like, yeah, well, I still have rent to pay during that time period. So that was somewhat shocking. It was, I had sort of anticipated it. So I was already shoring the business up and cutting out expenses wherever I could. But I mean, it was tough. And we started having to put money out of our own pockets into the business to try and keep it afloat, anticipating hopefully we would get to the fall and we'd pick up again. So, I mean, I could have easily given up. And there were days I came home from work and my wife and I were talking and it was like, well, we just got to shut this down. And the only reason I didn't shut it down was because I felt a responsibility for the people that, one, had invested in the business, and two, the people that were our renters or our members. I just couldn't give up. So I just didn't. I figured it out at that point.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I remember those days myself, and I've had a number of businesses, a couple of nice successes and a couple of spectacular failures. And
sure.
I think you're right. I think people underestimate that there's that whole kind of, yes, things are going along. As you said, the first 18 months is exciting. It's fun. You don't mind that you're not making money, and you keep telling yourself it will come right. It'll all be fine. But then, as you said, the next kind of 12 to 18 months are when it's really, really hard. And I think for a lot of people, they just, they don't have the resilience. They don't have the tools. And also sometimes we actually follow an idea that maybe isn't the right idea, and we're not prepared to make the change either. So thinking about what's working, what's not working. Yeah. So the co-working spaces, where did they get to?
Well, we today own 3 spaces in the Austin area. We've grown. We're actually kind of tacking the business. So as I sold some of my businesses last year, I started to look at, okay, well, I don't function well if I'm not doing a bunch of things. So I literally could not work and be fine, but I don't function well in that world. So I had to kind of change up a little bit. And one of the areas, I had been investing in real estate, but what I realized was, one, when I analyzed the co-working business side of my life, it was kind of maxed out. I mean, it's one of those things, you start reaching a point where you could only rent so much space between the doors. And so I really had to start looking at, okay, what can we do? What are the different revenue sources we have? What are different ways we could do this? And how could we raise, the money that we're making on that business? And so I ended up analyzing and saying, okay, well, what else could we do in that space to raise the revenue? So one of the things we did is actually we partnered with a pretty big time testing company where we became a testing center, or we're in the process of becoming a testing center for this major testing company that does all kinds of different testing for IT certifications, things like that. As I started to analyze those seats, so like one office in my building, or one office in our office, it makes X revenue. Well, when I started analyzing this, even if it didn't do maximum effort, it's almost triple the revenue. So it's almost 3x for those same 3 seats. So we made a commitment to basically convert half of our space into those. And this is really an anticipation of eventually selling that part of the business. So I needed to look at, well, what's a sustainable revenue model? What is controllable for me versus kind of being at the mercy of the renters we have? Because a lot of times we have a company that might come in that, they're there for a while, and then all of a sudden they kind of outgrow us. And so we're always on this never ending cycle of replacing people and then getting new ones in and all that. So this was a way to have some revenue that I felt like I at least had some control over from that perspective. And then the other side of it is I started to look at, well, hell, we're a real estate company, and I've been doing real estate, and on the side as my own side business. So I decided, well, you know what, we're going to become a real estate. We're going to just take the real estate to the next level. So, this is that whole, okay, what other revenue sources, what other things can you do within that company? And that's really, this year has been extremely successful at that. We launched a real estate wholesaling operation. So this was something that when I was selling my business, I just had a bunch of time on my hands. And so I literally took every real estate course I could, read every book I could. And I came up with the idea of starting a real estate wholesale operation. So, we go out and we find a residential property basically that is not pretty, but it's something that could be fixed. We gain control of that, and then we sell that to another real estate investor that's down the food chain from us. So that's one way. We are also doing midterm rentals. So we've acquired some properties through different ways, and we're doing midterm rentals. So you have short-term rentals like Airbnb, and you have long-term rentals, which is, the traditional rental market. Well, there's this kind of interesting spot in between for people that need a place to stay for 30 days beyond. Typically up to a year maximum. And we started to market those properties to traveling nurses, which is a major thing in the United States. Traveling nurses, there's like 2.5 million of them in the United States. And they travel on like 13-week contracts to different places. So hospitals that need more staff, they'll hire them to come in, and they're basically a hired gun. And they don't want to live in a hotel. They don't want to live in a hotel for, 13 weeks. So they typically are looking for a furnished apartment or house or something like that. Sometimes they have kids or pets, and they just want to be more comfortable and feel like they have a home. And so I found that little way of doing things, and it's actually a very profitable way of doing things. It's the profit level is very similar to the Airbnb model without the trouble of every 3 days. Yeah, you're turning them over and you're constantly cleaning these places. I mean, we clean them once every 3 months instead. So it's just awesome. A lot of fun.
Hey, I actually had a similar idea a few years ago, and my market was actually a much more niche. It was the divorce market, because I kind of realized that often when you get divorced, you end up splitting up, and you need somewhere to go, but it's for maybe 3 months to 12 months, depending on how long the divorce takes and depending on what's going on. And you want to have your pets, you want to have your home comforts, but you don't need to buy or rent a place long term. So interesting.
And it's also just taking. Once again, you don't want to live in a hotel for that time period. We found a couple times too, people that maybe their home got destroyed by a fire or something, so they have nothing, and they're trying to rebuild their lives, rebuild their homes, and it's a place that, hey, they can come in. Most times the insurance company actually pays us directly in those cases for housing them for that time period.
I love it, yeah. Hey, it takes me back to my days when I was running the common co-working space, and I had a similar moment where after 18 months, we were starting to kind of break even, but it was really tough because, as you said, you're always looking to people to replace the people that in there. You had a limited number of desks, and we had to kind of pivot a wee bit too and go, what else can we do with this space? And so we actually ended up going, we took a big chunk of the space and actually converted it into an event center and installed a bar and had high-end kind of business events there. It was a very unusual building. But I have to be honest, it wasn't me that kind of came up with that idea. I was actually feeling a bit kind of like, this isn't working. What am I going to do? And I actually brought some an advisory board team together to say, hey, give me some ideas, help me with that. Because sometimes it can be tough, right? Because you're so in there fighting the fires, trying to keep the fires burning, if you like. What do you suggest people do when they're feeling like that?
Well, and I think you said it perfectly. You had an advisory board. What I have done, really what I discovered early in my career, I've always had mentors. I've always had coaches. So I've paid for coaches and mentors throughout that time period. And, I think for me, one of the things that I did when I was really looking at, okay, what else can we do? What else can we tack to? What are some other ideas? At those early days, holy crap, I don't know where money's going to come from. I was still paying for a coach who I worked with. And, Stan was he was the guy that always said, I can't teach you how to do your business better. But what I've always said about Stan was he made me a better me. at that point. So
Right.
he was able to kind of pull me out of me and get myself out of the way, which is what a good coach does. And, I've paid for business consultants to come in, both good and bad, to look at the business and say, okay, well, what can we do? But I've always had mentors. And I think that's one of the real critical things. Being a CEO, a president is probably one of the loneliest jobs you're ever going to have, because it's not something that, I've been fortunate because in my co-working business, my wife has been my business partner for almost 6 of the 7 years. And,
Oh, wow.
I get to go home and we can kind of blow stuff off. And I mean, we both have our days where we come home and it's just like, I can't take it anymore, blah, 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 like that. And the other one's kind of sitting there going, all right, let it out. And then we go. So we've been fortunate from that perspective, but not everybody has that. And the problem with being the CEO of a company is it's not like you can go to any of the people that work for you and go, holy crap, I don't know how we're going to keep this thing alive, because they tend to then leave and go away because they're worried about their paycheck. So I think you need to find people who, I look at, I have a 3-stage world when it comes to the people that I interact with. I always have a group of peers that I hang out with. So we can at least share, hey, we're all out fighting alligators in the alligator pit. What are you doing? What am I doing? I've always had people that are mentors who I've looked up to, who are where I want to be. So I'm always looking for those kind of people. And then, I look at giving back too. So I do a lot of mentoring for, entrepreneurs that are not where I'm at, and want to be where I'm at. And so I just kind of break my interaction time up into those 3 different groups. And that's been helpful for me, quite frankly, through masterminds and mentorships. And I don't necessarily look for coaches anymore because I hire mentors, because I look at a coach sometimes as somebody who may or may not have actually done what I do. And are they theoretically talking about this? They're talking about the theory, but mentors that I hire, they're actually out there doing it. And that's
it's actually one of my bugbears. It's like anybody can actually call themselves a coach, and you can go to a coaching course and you have all the theory in the world. What I loved about EOS and the reason I kind of joined them was they have that all of their EOS implementers actually have to be business owners or have been business owners, and so we're both a coach and a mentor in that role.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important.
Absolutely, and every EOS implementer I've worked with, I mean, they've always been somebody that they've been there or they're still there. And they are really anyhow, because they're building their EOS business on top of it.
Yes, true.
So, it's true from that perspective. But that's the thing I've always loved about EOS is, okay, these are people that have taken the time to learn, the model of EOS, but they've also brought a crap ton of experience before that of both good and bad. I mean, you're a great example of that when you're on my podcast. I mean, you've had great experiences and you've had tough times, and you were running a co-working space in the middle of a pandemic, which just is awful. But you bring all of that when you're sitting down with your clients. So I always recommend people, and really lately more, I would say over the last 2 to 3 years, I've hired what I call mentors. And I've hired mentors, not just gone to them and said, hey, I expect you to just give to me. I'm going to pay you, and I really want your honest advice. And what I find from hiring mentors is they don't have time for BS. They're not sitting there and saying, oh, well, let's coach for 6 months and I'll walk you through and I'll be your, accountability partner. The mentors I've hired have been pretty brutal, and they don't suffer fools. So when I go to them and say, well, I didn't get that done what I told you I was going to do because I was so busy, and they look at me and go, well, I'm not. and you're wasting you're wasting my time.
Yeah, wasting my time. Yeah, where's the respect?
And I mean, I can make a lot more money doing what I do for a living than helping you right now. And that's, it's helped me to then be, okay, I'm really accountable and I value what these people do. I'm willing to spend the money with them and I value what they do. And I don't want to lose access to that because I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
It's what the advisory board, I paid for it as well.
Yep.
A similar thing. You kind of look at your strengths and weaknesses and go, where am I weak? What do I need somebody to hold me accountable for? Who's been there, done that in that particular area, that particular skill set, and have them to hold you accountable? I want to talk a little bit about peer groups as well, though, because peer groups are actually really, really interesting. And I've been a member of EO. I've been a member of, I've been involved with tech and things like that. And I think that it's actually really important. And we run some masterminds ourselves for some of our clients. And we just had one yesterday. And I have to say, every time I run these things, I actually get to learn too. So, it's just that being in a room with people who are going through it or doing it, it's just such a great way to tap into other people's experience.
Well, and especially if you get, and, I've been invited to multiple masterminds over the years. And what I always tell people is, I don't really always like masterminds because I'm typically the most motivated person in the room. And what I found over the years was it all became, well, Jeff, what are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, well, what are you doing? And like I said, it would be some of those instances where I typically today, if I'm going to be part of a mastermind, I probably am going to spend $10,000 to $20,000 a year in that mastermind, and I'm going to be in there with people that are like me. In fact, they're people that aren't like me because they're people that are so motivated that I get in there and I'm like, wow, I'm an idiot. I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing. I mean, you're making millions of dollars a year and you're doing all this and you've got, all this successful stuff going on. Why am I in this room? But that's, I think to take it to that next level, I'm at that point right now in my own personal life. I really, the whole Freedom Day stuff, all the stuff around Freedom Day really started to coalesce last summer when my business partner wanted to buy me out of our financial practice because I didn't really fit anymore. I was really tacking over to a different thing that just, it was a round peg in a square hole and it wasn't going to work. And he felt like I was kind of distracted from what we were doing within the practice, which I really was. But it allowed me then to say, okay, what is it? If I were to just say, I'm going to restart over and I'm going to do things a different way in my life, and I want to work with people and help them achieve their Freedom Day, well, what would I need to do? And that's really what I've spent the last 8 months working on. I think when you and I talked, I told you I was working on a book, still working on the book, mainly because what I started to discover as I was writing, I'm like, crap, I don't know all the pieces of the story. And not all the pieces had been put together. They were kind of out there and I had to figure out how they all went together. And that's really been the last, I would say, 5 months was pulling the pieces together and seeing how they fit. And then looking at, okay, now how do I get all these disparate pieces of my life that I've had for really the last 7 years? How do I get those all into one common thing, which is something that I had not been for the last 7 years? How do I get into a common thing? So from the communications perspective, okay, I do a podcast. I do, I have a YouTube channel. I write books. I write articles. I have web pages. Okay, how do all those coalesce into that Freedom Day story? And how does that then get to the end client? And I think that's important. I think a lot of businesses, as they start adding things, and I did this, you got to make sure that those are all kind of pulling in the same direction. And that was with the old practice. I wasn't pulling in the same direction anymore because I didn't really, what we were doing with my old practice was the old way of doing things. And I just don't think the old way of doing things works anymore in the financial world. I think you have to think of cash flow first instead of amassing dollar amounts. Well, that's something that if you're a wealth manager, the only way you get paid is to amass dollar amounts. and not
Yes.
necessarily to help people create, revenue streams.
The cash flow. Yeah.
Yeah, and cash flow. And so that was kind of what I had to extract myself from. Now, I still built a wealth management practice. I do have that now. But the wealth management practice is just a small piece of what I do for my clients. I put together strategies. I help them if they want to get into real estate. I help them do that. If they want to start businesses, I'll help guide them. But then I work with partners like you that, it's like, okay, you've got this business up and running, but how are you going to get it to where you want to be? And I don't want to do that. That's not my skill set, and I'm not going to be good at that. That's just not what I enjoy. So I work with partners that can help kind of move them along the path. And the other side of things, I work with a lot of business owners that were who I was. If you looked at me prior to the pandemic, I was working, typically I'd get up at 6:00 in the morning, I'd be at work by about 7:30. I would work until like 7:00 at night, all the way through. I'd eat, but I'd eat at my desk.
At the desk.
And I focused my whole day on work. If you looked at my calendar, it looked like a fruit salad because there was all these different colors on it. And every minute of my day was accounted for. And I would come home and I'd have dinner with my wife, for like 30 minutes. We'd clean the dishes up. And then I would start working from, let's say, 8 p.m. until 11 and, rinse and repeat every day. And then every Saturday, every Sunday, we might go out and do a little bit of running around in the morning. I would come back and I would be working the rest of the day. So I was working 70, 80-hour weeks. I was beat down, but I just am one of these people that can keep up that pace. And when the pandemic hit, it was interesting because all of a sudden everything went and stopped overnight. And all of a sudden I was like, with the co-working spaces, well, nobody was in except for the few people that had rented space. They were coming in on a regular basis. We had most of our people still with us. We started to add new people in, but, we're like, well, most people, we were having to do all this idiotic cleaning, which we now realize was completely worthless. But, we said, well, okay, we'll open from, instead of 8 until 5, we'll open from 9 to 4. And that gave us enough time at the beginnings of the end of the day to clean. Well, after the pandemic kind of started to subside, we're like, why are we opening before 9 o'clock and why are we staying open after 4? Because nobody comes, most of the time, nobody would come in until 9. If they wanted to, most of those people had 24-hour access, so they can come and go as they please. After 4 p.m., most of the people that were there, that didn't have 24-hour access were already gone. So why are we staying open after those times? So all of a sudden I went from, I was working 7 until 7. Now, all of a sudden, I'm working from 9 until 4, and I realized there was actually a life outside of work. And I then started to look at, what am I doing? And I realized in a lot of my life, and this was kind of a sore point with my business partner, because what happened, especially during the pandemic, like all of our staff started working from home, and this was in the financial practice. My business partner and I were the only two that were there for a long time. And the staff all of a sudden started to take advantage of that and say, oh, well, yeah, if you need to drop in a check, Jeff will be there at the office. Jeff can do that. Jeff can do this. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, why am I working so hard and everybody else isn't? I'm being delegated to, and I run the place. So I flipped the gears on them and I kind of redesigned my life and said, no, you're going to work on this. And if somebody's dropped by a check, you better get your butt here to the office because I'm not going to be here to do that. And that kind of started to create a little bit of a rub with my employees, but I didn't really care anymore. I was looking at, I'm not going to live the life that I was living. And that was the big change for me. And so I now do I do a keynote speech that I call Procrastination for Fun and Profit, which is really, how do you fix your life? If you are that person that was me, where your schedule was all covered up, and you had everything planned out for the day, just use a simple acronym. in your life, and so this is what procrastination for fun and profit is. Use the acronym IDEA. So IDEA.
Idea, yeah.
So
Yeah.
one idea, the first thing is identify. So identify what's coming in at you. Don't take action on it, but identify what's coming in at you. Then you take that, what it's coming in at you, and the first thing is delegate. So I might have a task list of everything that's kind of coming at me for the day. And instantly I go through that and say, okay, this can be delegated to my wife. She can handle that. This can be delegated to my virtual assistant in the Philippines. This can be delegated to my one of my other community managers that works for me and does social media stuff. Okay, great. Done. That's off my plate. Now, the remaining things that are on there, what can be eliminated? Okay, is this just something stupid that we just keep doing and there's no reason for it? A great example of this is my email. So I used to get on every single day, I would get about 600 to 700 emails. So I had about 8 different email accounts for different businesses, and I would get about 800 emails a day. And what would happen is I just wouldn't take any action on them. So I would have, then 800 turned into 1,600, then to 2,400. And it was just this never ending thing. And I would eventually just go, ugh. And I'd go through and, I would realize as I'm looking through all these things, there are newsletters that people sign me up for. People just automatically made my name part of their list. I had all these things that kept building and building and building. And really only about a quarter or less of the messages I was receiving were worth anything. So I found this tool that I was able to go in, and it basically it's called Unroll. And Unroll, you can go in, you can sign your email account into it, and it goes through and it helps you unsubscribe from all these things. So I went from 800 emails a day now down to about, I'd say less than 100 at that point between 8 email accounts. And they're all actionable things that I need to do. Okay, so that was eliminate from my life. Then the last thing is automate. I'll give you an example in my financial practice. So I'm part of a lead generation group that generates leads. And what I was finding is, and I saw this back in my old firm, what happens is, they generate at least 1 to 2 leads per day. Well, that's fine. It's easy to manage 1 to 2 leads per day until you get 2 leads today, 2 leads tomorrow, 2 leads after that, and you're not getting a hold of the clients. So all of a sudden now I'm getting bowled under. Our solution with my old firm was, well, we just need to hire another person, and we need to hire another person. Well, what I ended up doing with that, with my new business, I was like, well, I don't really want to hire any more people. I want to run this for as long as I can with just me. So I just simply created an automation that does everything for me. So I get a lead in, I put them into the lead system. It actually does outbound. It actually makes an outbound call and leaves a message. Wow. It does it sends an email, it sends a text, and then I have kind of a 14-day process where it's sending texts and emails and outbound phone calls and all that. So I don't do anything at that point. I've found that it's almost, I'm still tweaking it, but it's almost as effective as what I was doing it. So I'm converting about 50% of those leads into conversations, which is about where we were when I was sitting there making phone calls all day.
That's fantastic. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to do a quick summary of what we talked about. There's a few things here that I think are really important. So the first thing was make sure you're looking for multiple streams in your business place, right? So what are the different multiple streams you can look at? The next one, I want to use a bit of a sports analogy. It's like when you play tennis, and I'm a big tennis fan, you should play with somebody who's better than you because that is the only way you can actually improve your game. So surround yourself with people who are either at a similar level or better than you so that you can actually improve yourself. And then use the IDEA framework, which is identify, delegate, eliminate, and automate, to actually free up your time and say no more often, right? So there's people who say no to things that actually help free up your time. Brilliant. Okay, so what are your kind of 3 top tips based on that we've discussed? What would you say are the 3 top tips that you'd offer as advice to people who are on that journey?
I would say if you do not have somebody, if you are a solopreneur or you're a small business owner, if you don't have either an advisory board, like
Yep.
you were talking about, or
A
you don't
paid
have
advisory board.
a paid advisory board, and if you don't have a paid mentor, you need to figure that out quickly.
Yep.
That is it's an absolute must, because you're just not, you either are not playing at your top game, and, I mean, Tiger Woods still, he's a wildly successful golfer, still pays a coach to teach him, swing mechanics and everything else. So every top athlete in the world and every top entrepreneur that I've ever met has mentors that they can go to. And most often they're paying for those mentors. And I mean, sometimes that might be, I looked at one and I just didn't have it in my budget, but I figured out how to do it. And I mean, it was a really big check. It was one of the biggest checks I ever wrote to somebody, but that one thing turned into a 7-figure exit from my business. One thing.
Perfect.
And what I had invested was about an eighth of that. And last but not least, what I would say is you've got to look at your business and say, am I maximizing what the business can do? If you're, let's say, a physical business, what can you be doing on the internet? And most people will be like, oh, well, I don't have any way of doing that. No, everybody has different ways of making money. Everybody has different skill sets and things that you have experience at. In my practice, one of the things I realized was I don't want to work with individual clients as much anymore. I want to work with a small subset of clients, but I still need to help all those other people. So I developed and am launching very, very quickly here a new program that is me taking people through the Freedom Day process without necessarily me being there.
So an online kind of course.
Yeah, it's an online course that's, much more affordable. And then if they reach a point where they're like, you know what, I really need somebody to help, then I'm there and I'm available to them, but I need them to get through that first. So that's another revenue stream for me at that point, and then I think the last thing is you need to make sure, especially if you're an entrepreneur, if you're who I was, who was working myself to death, you've got to stop. And you've also got to not feel bad when you step away from the business for a week's vacation or something. I just in the last 7 years, I have taken one 7-week vacation. Why?
Yay.
Because 1, I just didn't feel like I could be away from the business. And 2, I didn't trust the people that work for me. And I have consciously worked on building my team to where they can take advantage, or, they can actually work without us being there. And my wife and I, my wife is even more controlling than I am sometimes. And she's like, well, I can't, I've got to be there. And I said, we're paying people to be there. Why are you there also? We've got to trust them. We got to trust them that they're going to make mistakes, and we can't come in and beat them in the face and say, well, you made a mistake. It's just, okay, you made a mistake. What do we do differently next time? But I need them, and I'm working super, super hard that in the next 24 months, we're going to take a full month away from the businesses, all of them. And we're just going to go over to Europe. We're going to probably go to France and spend a month in France. I'm going to buy some real estate when we're over there just to have a little bit of fun. But we need to be able to step away from the businesses. And I want to be able to have maybe a 10-minute call on Monday morning with my team. All right, what's going on for the week? What have you got? What, is there anything you need from me? Other than that, I'm done. Don't call me unless the building's burning down and I expect you to call the fire department first. And if somebody's robbed it, call the police department because I can't help you. Other than that, I don't expect to talk to you until next Monday.
Yeah. And that's what we call letting go with the EOS, right? It's like if you can actually build up the structure and the accountability and the people around you, you should be able to let go. And that's when life really does become, doing what you love with people you love and having time to pursue other stuff.
Well, it's when you become a business owner instead of an operator.
That's
the biggest difference. Don't be an operator. be an owner of a business, and an
Owner.
owner of a business does not work in the business.
No, completely agree. Jeff, we could talk all day. I know we could, but we are running out of time. I really appreciate it. It's been great to hear your side of the story, because obviously we've talked before about my side of the story.
Yep.
Love the stuff that you shared there. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
A couple of different ways. So if you want to kind of follow the Freedom Day journey, I would recommend listening to our podcast. It's the freedomnationpodcast.com. I share actually other people's stories. Deb's been on there before. So I share people's stories that have gotten their freedom. Certainly, you can reach out to me directly, Jeff at Jeff Kikel, so JEFFKIKEL.com. I'm more than glad to do that, or connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Those are my two places, are my jams. Love to connect with you, and I love to have people all over the world that I work with.
Brilliant. And also, we should mention the book, because the book will be ready by the time this podcast comes out. So the book is on freedomdaybook.com. Is that right?
Yes, it is. freedomdaybook.com. So for the listeners, you'll be able to go on there and get the first chapter for free, which kind of tells my little story that I told at the beginning here. But also, for those of you that download that and you're Debra's listeners, we'll actually give you a really, really discounted price on the book as well.
Fantastic. Oh, that's awesome. Hey, Jeff, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Really appreciate your time, and we'll keep in contact. Talk to you soon.
Excellent. I look forward to the next time you're over here on this side of the pond, or I'm on your side of the pond. So
we're definitely going to have to catch up in person. I agree. Thank you.
All right, my friend.